You're listening to the Dibbly-Dobbly podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. But before we do that, Nate, before we try and answer that question, will cricket take off or kick off in America? Let's get to know about you a little bit, your cricketing journey. Trying to get into cricket, discovering cricket. So as I do with all my guests that I've interviewed, Nate, on the podcast, I like to take them back when they first got into cricket. And it's been very fascinating listening to people's memories on how they got started in cricket. So Nate, how did you get into cricket, first of all?
Sure. Well, 2015, I work in IT. And of course, that means I work with a lot of folks from South Asia, a lot of expats from Pakistan and from India, especially. And so 2015 World Cup came around. Some of my coworkers were talking about fantasy sports. I thought they were talking about fantasy football, which is huge here. And I was thinking, well, it's too early for fantasy football because it wasn't football season. So I was like curious, and what are you talking about? Oh, we're talking about cricket. We got the World Cup is happening. And so I'm like, oh, well, I may as well learn about this. So I have something to talk about when we all have tea and coffee. So yeah, I went back and forth with them. They did not do a good job explaining it to me. Um, but they were very passionate about it. And that's the passion that they had for it was appealing to me. And so I tried to learn about it myself. Before I even watched any cricket, I was up late at night watching the ball by ball commentary, just literally just watching and reading the commentary, trying to figure out what was going on, piecing that together with the knowledge that I had and with whatever I could Google. And so it started to make sense to me. I saw a lot of really interesting potential for creativity in the sport and for strategy that I appreciated. And so then I finally saw my first cricket, my first like real relevant cricket. Obviously, by this point, I had Googled and I had watched some things, but the first contemporary cricket that I saw that was relevant to the moment was, and actually at the time in 2015, it was hard to find anything cricket online, any videos. It was harder than it should be. Basically, it was limited to like highlight reels of great fielding plays, which is really what hooked me at first was but what seriously hooked me and made me realize, okay, I love this sport was the was the Shane Watson versus Wahab Riaz spell in
Oh, yeah, yeah.
2015. When I saw that, and I've talked about this a couple times this week already with people, but when I saw how fiery and aggressive Wahab Riaz was, and after he would finish his run up, he would be right there in Watson's face, clapping his hands, in his face and looking at him and staring him down. And the intimidation there, and I, as a baseball fan, as someone who played college baseball, I can appreciate that the bat and ball matchup and the intimidation that a really violent pitcher can slash bowler can bring. And I really appreciated Watson's courage in the moment. And so this combination of what he was up against and what Wahab Riaz was bringing to him, that just really fired me up. And I said, okay, I've got to try this sport. I have to watch this sport. I got to find some way to really get into this sport. So that's how I got into it. And then it was just, I had this idea in my head that like, wow, how could cricket translate to American fans? What really inspired me was that the fact that there were three major formats: T20, ODI, and then Test. And looking at these three formats, I was like, which of these things would appeal to an American and which of these things would be weird to an American to an off-putting degree? And then I was thinking, of course, I'm starting to think about kids. You want to get kids into playing the game, and how are kids going to how is the average American kid who's never touched cricket in their life, how are you going to appeal to them when maybe they bat number 6 in a T20 and maybe your opening pair goes the whole game and bats and doesn't get out, and like American parents are not going to keep bringing your kid out in those situations. What if your kid doesn't bowl? You're standing in the field and you get 3 balls hit to you the whole time. I was just thinking, yeah, that's the obstacle that cricket has to new people. with youth, because obviously you want to get youth playing. So I started to think of new formats. It was kind of cool because I looked at baseball, I looked at cricket like it was the perfect backyard sport because of how scalable it was, and how there's multi-inning games and there's single inning games, and comparing it and contrasting it to baseball. And I had all these cool, I thought they were great ideas, right? I'm just like writing out all these different formats for cricket, and myself, and I'm studying the three formats, and I'm seeing, how could you make a format for kids to play that would really hook them in. That was my initial, because I was coaching soccer at the time, youth soccer, and that was my initial motivation. But then I started to play it, and then I got the video games, the Don Bradman cricket, and then the Cricket 19, and obviously 2020 comes around, and everyone has time. I'm not playing cricket now because our cricket season's canceled. I'm not playing ice hockey, which is something I also enjoy doing, because obviously nobody's doing anything. So I needed to spend some time on something, and because I was losing my mind. And so I just had this idea. I was like, well, Peter Della Penna, the writer for ESPN Crick Info, I liked this idea he had for a national championship. Now, if you're a fan of American cricket, by this point in time, I was a fan of American cricket pretty big in 2020. And there's a lot in between 2015 and 2020. I'm just jumping right now. But when you're a fan of USA Cricket, you get used to things not making sense. You get used to them not doing things the obvious things that make sense to, you're like, this national, what are they doing? And so Peter had this idea for a national championship, which was basically he called it the red, white, and blue series, where you get the best enough players to fill three teams, and you have them play down in Florida or wherever. And I'm in my version was have them play here in Morrisville, North Carolina at Church Street Park. But so basically I just said, okay, you know what? I like this idea, and I understand that one thing I understand, because I was an art major in college. I have an art degree, is when you draw something out for someone, or when you make something that illustrates your idea, it does a better job than just saying it or than them reading the words. And so I said, you know what? I'll take this Cricket 19. I can create my own players there. I'll create the best, 42 or so cricketers in the USA. And I'll put them on these three teams. I'll make three teams for these players. And so I started doing a lot of research about, okay, I already knew about probably 25 to 30 of the best cricketers in the country. And so I started talking to some of those guys and asking them, who, looking at articles where players were invited to combines to trials and things like that. And I started looking at all these different cricketers and learning about them, and literally having phone conversations about cricketers that, like, in Chicago or something. And so I started like making these players on the video game. And it was long and slow. And then I just basically did a series called the Red, White, and Blue series. And I hired Aman Patel, which was my friend. So when I first got into to cricket, I joined a team, and my first practice I came out. My friend Snail's son, Aman, was there, and he was, I think, 12 at the time. And him and I, we threw an American football around for most of the practice, and I was talking to him about, his favorite football team and stuff like that. And so, anyways, this youngster, by this point in 2020, he was 5 years old. He was 17 years old, and so I was like, hey, I noticed that he had his own podcast that he just started, where he's talking about sports. And I knew he was really into that, and that's what he wanted to do for his career. So I said, hey, look, if I record these games and then cut them down into highlights for my series, can you and make like little 7-minute videos or whatever about the games in this imaginary series that I'm making? Can I pay you to do the commentary for the highlight reel? And he was like, okay, cool. So here I am, 39 years old, sending these videos to a 17-year-old kid who both of us are looking for something to do. And he does the commentary on these videos, and we made a whole series about it. And, it turned, it was cool. It was fun. But one of the great things about it was how much the domestic cricketers in the USA liked it. You know, they liked it and they shared it, and it got me in touch with a lot of cricketers. So then Emerging Cricket stumbles across it, and they message me and they're like, "Look, we're looking for a American correspondent, somebody who knows the domestic cricket scene in the USA." And clearly by this point I'm on the short list. So I was like, you know, they were like, you know, would you like to contribute with us? And I thought I would be editing videos at first or making a lot of graphics, which is what I kind of have hit, you know, more experience doing, making graphic arts and things like that. And so I was like, sure, yeah, I'll do it. And then I had to really think about it when I decided to write an article one day because I saw something that was interesting. I at the time there were all these rumors about Major League coming around and what Major League was up to, and you know, so I wrote an article about a player that I had found an interview. Somebody, a cricketer from Nigeria, emails or messages me on Instagram, sending me this conversation between a player and his agent, and the player's saying, "Yeah, Major League Cricket's hiring me to move to the USA." And so at this point in time, there were rumors this was happening, but we didn't have any confirmed names, you know, or a couple. So I basically wrote an article right then about this conversation, published it. It did really, really well. I mean, it was a long time before I wrote another article that did as well as the very first one I wrote for Emerging Cricket. And I noticed right away that people are really interested in the developments of ACE, American Cricket Enterprises, of Major League Cricket and minor league cricket, and all these things were about to emerge. And I had time on my hands, so that's how I got into Emerging Cricket. And I'll tell you what, the group of guys at Emerging Cricket are phenomenal. They're just everything we do is volunteer. So you know, we don't get paid for it, but we do it out of passion. And every one of these guys that's a vital part of Emerging Cricket works very hard, and they already have their own careers and their own jobs, and they try to be involved in cricket as much as they can. And some of them are involved. Tim Cutler is the CEO for Vanuatu Cricket. He was one of the founders. He used to be the CEO for Hong Kong. You know, Daniel Beswick, he does a lot of stuff for, I think, Fox in Australia, and he works a lot with the ICC. And all these guys. Nick, he's a busy guy. He's actually moved to Iceland, where his wife is studying in college, and so, or she's studying a grad degree there. So yeah, there are all these great things that these guys do. Rod Lyle, who actually I think he started the European Cricket website, and he writes about the Netherlands, and he's probably the top guy. Well, him and Bertus are the top guys that write about Netherlands cricket. So meeting these guys, I was in awe of them. The funny thing is, I had already subscribed. I was already a Patreon to Emerging Cricket. I was loyally listening to their podcast. It was my favorite podcast. I would listen to it, every episode I listened to, and I loved when they had guests on that were like, for example, like the CEO of like Germany, or like Spain. All these, learning about how these nations grew the game was what I was most interested in, because I wanted cricket to work here. And so I started writing about it. I started, asking questions to our own national governing body and to our own cricketers, and writing articles that I thought were significant and important, and trying to hold somebody's feet to the fire here. And, that's not an easy thing to do, because they can easily just not reply to you, which I've learned, but yes, so that's how I got into cricket. Writing about it was like the first thing I did really that I think was semi-significant with Emerging Cricket. But then ever since then I've moved. I still write for them when I can, but it's hard for me. I don't know how guys like Jared Kimber or I don't know how these guys do video content and pods, and then also they'll write articles, and they just switch boom boom boom. For me, I have
to get into the game as well. Traveling.
Yeah, and I've got to be in a different headspace for every one of those things. It's hard for me to switch gears from one one thing to the next. But I'm doing my best. And now I have my own thing called Big Innings that I do with Amin Patel, the youngster, who's now at UNC, and with Bobber Beg, who's our producer, and with Dane Pete, who is former South Africa test spinner who plays in Major League Cricket. And so we have that going on. We call it the America's Cricket Show. We did a live show all through Major League Cricket, and we haven't done an episode in about a week. I'm actually working on editing an interview I did with Atif Nawaz, talking about the 100 and MLC and all these great things. But yeah, that's how I got into it, and obviously I'm pretty deep into it, and it takes up all my spare time.
It does with everyone, mate.
Yeah,
I'm in the same boat. Once you get the cricket bug, you can't stop. You want more. That's what cricket does, and sport does in general.
And I think cricket especially does that because it's not yet lived up to its promise. I think in some places in the world it certainly has, but overall we see the potential for this wonderful game of cricket. And I think if you love the sport, you want to immerse yourself in it and try to influence and impact that in any way that you can at all, and try to move the needle, because we know that yes, if somebody tells you that cricket's the second most popular sport in the world, they're selling you something. Yes, by numbers it is, but let's talk about the health of cricket in general. There are so many problems with cricket, that you and I and people who love the game, we want to see cricket overcome these problems. We want to see it move beyond the protectionism that has limited it for over 100 years. And we have millions of examples of this. We have so many examples of this, especially in the USA. If you know about American cricket, if you know about the history of cricket in the USA, you can really have an appreciation for anti-protectionism. That's always what cricket's been. It's always been protect this class, and that can't be that way. It needs to be more democratic. It needs to be more for everybody. And so I think, anybody who loves the game agrees with that, I believe, unless you have some incentive to not agree with that.
Yeah, but cricket's one of those oldest sports, steeped in tradition, history, and it's very hard to try and move away from that. People don't like change. People want things to stay as the status quo.
Right, but some people also like right and wrong. It's like sometimes this is not just a cricket issue, but sometimes people like things to stay the same, but let's do it the right way. Let's make sure that it's done right, and that that's the big thing to me is there's a right way to do this. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of sports that do certain things better than cricket does, and we can look at those and we can learn from them. And I feel the same way about everything in my life as I do about cricket. It's like there's always somebody out there doing the thing that you're trying to do or that you should be doing better than you are, and you recognize those people and those entities, and you try to emulate them wherever possible, and find out what makes those things work, and try to implement those problems, which honestly by and large our society is very bad at that, because everything in society is protectionism. Everything is. The status quo is not going to go away on its own.
Yeah, that's the thing. Do you think cricket is doing enough to promote associate nations within the ICC?
No, not at all. Part of that is budget. Part of it is, okay, look, I understand the argument that there's an argument to be made that if you give certain boards money, you're just throwing it down a hole. I agree with that. That's true. So I think you kind of solve that with incentives. You have to understand what success looks like. What does success look like to the ICC? That's what they have to determine first of all. What do you count as a successful thing? And also, Major League Cricket was very successful here. You watch a Major League Cricket game, the broadcast is fantastic. You watch a USA game at 4 a.m. on the other side of the earth because you're passionate about it. You watch that and you're lucky to get through the game with the stream intact, and let alone be able to tell what you're looking at. You know, you should be able to look at the batters on the screen and tell which one's which. You know, the broadcast quality is poor, and part of that's because of the limitations of the infrastructure wherever they're playing. You know, if you're playing in Papua New Guinea, you're probably not going to have a great stream. But whenever and wherever possible, if you really want to spread the international game in the USA, the broadcast has to be good because there are so many options for us Americans as far as sports goes, and the broadcast quality is fantastic in every one of them. So you don't want to look like an amateur operation. Also, a nation like USA Cricket is not going to be able to get the sponsors that they need to have to sustain themselves in a very expensive environment without a good broadcast. You're just not going to. You're not going to appeal to Under Armour or Nike or anybody like that by showing them a USA broadcast. That's, you know, so ICC needs to spend more money on broadcast. To me, that's first and foremost. Is they need to spend more money on the broadcast, make sure it's quality, make sure they represent. That was, to me, one of the most tragic things when we secured ODI status, was watching the very next game that we played and seeing that it was the same quality as before we before we achieved ODI status. And so, to me, that's the biggest thing. And also, is T20 your flagship product as far as spreading the game? Is it the ICC? Because the ICC says that it is. The T20 is that. However, why don't we have a Cricket World Cup League 2 for T20? Why do we only have one for ODI? You know, associate ODI is miles better than full member ODI, if you ask me, in terms of the game quality. You know, you're not going to see a 450 run innings, you know, and then, you know, you win by 125 runs. You're not going to see that in associate cricket. You're going to see dogfights, and you're going to see 10 wickets in an innings. You know, it's like USA just did 36 of these things, and I think they averaged something like 7 wickets in innings in their batting innings. That doesn't happen in full member cricket. So to me, ODI cricket in the associate realm is closer to what it was intended to be in the first place, which is just a one day version of a test. And so, but not enough people watch it. T20 is your product that's going to reach into new markets and new demographics. And if you don't have a league, like USA has played literally 2 T20s that weren't qualifiers since 2018. 2. And that's, how are we supposed to spread cricket here if we're not playing T20 internationals? And so, yes, everyone talks about, are these bilaterals useless in full member? In full member cricket, that's a big talking point. Are bilaterals even important? Well, now there's no leagues. You know what I mean? Like, so, but like, I think they would be important to associates if they encouraged just more T20 cricket in general. But having a league, having a Cricket World Cup League 2 T20 version would be more beneficial than the ODI version, if you ask me. And that's what I think they should do.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, the MCC, the Maribyrnong Cricket Club, recently said that ODIs will be not existent in 2027, which is not far away, actually.
Not far away.
ODI cricket is in the talking point about its future, because you have T20 cricket, then you have Test cricket.
Yeah.
So one format probably will have to give, and it's probably one-day cricket as we speak. But that's also denying the associate countries who are members of the ICC an opportunity to play cricket. Because you know, if you have ODIs and T20s, they can play more cricket, they can get better, they can develop, they can travel the world.
Sure.
But if that's taken away, then they've only got T20 cricket left, which is probably not enough in their minds.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think because you have, I mean, look at Spain. Spain's goal right now is to make it to a one day nation. You know, I mean, they got a long way to go, but they need to get into the Challenge League was what their goal is. And they say that's their goal, and they actually like research how to manipulate the standings. The best way to manipulate the standings, this is how they plan their schedule, is the entirety of their schedule planning is how to manipulate the ICC rankings so that they can get up into the Challenge League, and so that they can start playing 50 overs cricket. And then their next goal will be obviously to make it to as a one-day nation, a one-day cricketing nation. So you have these carrots for these associate nations that have been around for a while that you're trying to tell them are important things, and then you're undermining that on the other hand by by saying, hey, we're not going to have, this isn't even going to be a thing in full member, in 4 years or whatever. So that's tricky. I think that this is just typical cricket identity crisis, where cricket doesn't know what it is. It's one of the coolest things about cricket is also its biggest burden, and that is there's a lot of formats. I think personally, I don't have a problem with saying like, okay, cricket exists in England this way, cricket exists in Australia this way. It doesn't have to exist everywhere the same way. Like there's cup match in Bermuda that everyone loves. And everyone goes to cup match, and I think it's a 2 or 3 day game, and that's that. But everyone loves it there. So let them have that. We need to get the Audi Cup going again. We need to have the rivalry of USA versus Canada renewed and consistent. We have fan bases here. If you played the Audi Cup here in Morrisville, North Carolina, you get 2,000 fans to every game every single time. If you did it in Brampton, in Canada, you'd get 2,000 fans. So, or maybe not 2,000, but you get a good amount of fans. And so, why aren't we doing that? Like that, we can do enough things without waiting for the ICC, to get their stuff together, because the ICC has a tough task at hand. They're trying to design something that's at the lowest common denominator. And we have our own essential needs. And so does every other national governing body. And so it's ultimately up to the national governing bodies to sort out what works for them. And if that means that we're just a T20 playing nation in the USA, which honestly, we play more T20 cricket here than anybody else in the world, as far as, our domestic game is T20. So if that's that, then so be it. It's just, I think we need to look at kind of a bespoke solution to this to some degree, and that's what the full members are already doing.
That's right. It seems that we're not working together as a cricketing community.
No, we're not.
It seems that everyone cares about their own self-interests, like money, profits, and that's the thing. When money is involved in sport, people care about that, and greed comes into it, and you don't think about others. It's like the 50 over World Cup. They cut that down to 10 teams, but they're going to extend it back out to 14 for the next World Cup in 2027.
And then 20 from there on.
Which is good.
Great.
Because
if they stick to it.
But are they going to go through with it? You see, things could change, you never know.
Well, I think what we need a compromise. We need to put India in the final automatically, and then have 19 other teams play against India in the final. I'm just kidding, but that's that's the thing, and the proof is in the pudding. What you just said, everyone's looking out for their own good. It's their responsibility to do that. It's kind of what happens in a capitalistic environment, and the proof is in the pudding in that the BCCI feel that they're justified to having 38.5% of the pie, and leaving the rest for a whole lot of other nations to split up, for over 100 nations to split up, and so it's. Meanwhile, you look at the distribution model of the revenue in the IPL; it's very equitable. And that goes to show you that the IPL understands that it's the IPL, it's their product. And they know that in order to sustain it and for it to be healthy, it has to be equitable. It has to be, you're only as strong as your weakest link. They know that. But on the international side of things, they don't care about how weak the weakest link is, because they only really care about themselves. And this is everybody.
Yes. Yeah, that's entirely true. It's sort of when, in terms of associate nations, well, Ireland's not an associate nation; they're a full member. But when they played the Test match against England recently at Lords,
Yeah,
they cared about more of the World Cup qualifiers that they had upcoming than the actual Test match itself.
sure.
Their priorities were slightly changed there, and that was
Yeah,
talked about. But I
yeah,
guess that's how Ireland get more opportunities and
yeah,
associate nations do, even though they
exactly.
are a full member,
Yeah,
because they do play Test cricket. So
no, 100%. That's 100% true. You know, it's survivalism for them. It's
mm,
all that's the thing. And yes, they're a test playing nation, but they're not a world test uh, cricket championship nation. And I hope that for their sake, the ICC, whenever they decide to impose this four four full member overseas cap in T20 franchise cricket, which has been talked about in terms of capping the playing 11s in T20 franchise cricket to 4 full member overseas. I hope that the ICC says, wait a second, we're going to have to not call it. We're not, if they cap it to just full members, you'll never see an Irish player play in a T20 league.
mm,
You'll never see that happen. So if they just say, okay, we're going to cap it to 4 World Test Cricket Championship teams, because I think that's a better definition of a certain class of cricket, is whether or not you're part of the World Test Cricket Championship, not necessarily whether you're a full member. But
yes, well, Ireland and Zimbabwe and Afghanistan don't play in the WTC.
exactly right,
It's only 9 teams.
right.
So
And so if they're lumped in as full members, where you're limiting, uh, the full member overseas to 4
mm,
outside of Rashid Khan, how many of those other guys are going to get a chance to play in a T20 franchise league if you're capping the full members? It's
yes,
going to be only be the World Test Championship game teams, sorry, the players that are going to be in there. And so if you allow, if they're going to do this, they have to allow a couple of associates / non World Test Cricket Championship players to join the teams too as overseas. You have to make room for that to bridge the gaps. Otherwise, the league in UAE is going to sink because they don't have the domestic talent to fill in the gaps.
yeah.
Yeah. So you know that could actually be a good thing for these associates, and then the I guess non World Test Championship uh full members.
Yeah, that's right. I think in the IPL, the last auction, we saw some associate member players in the auction, and some were considered and others weren't. But at least that's a good step in the right direction, I suppose.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Yeah. We know Sandeep Lamachani's been involved in a lot of these leagues, Nepal spinner, but there's a lot of great cricketers in associate cricket. Like, I think that if, the GT20 is not the greatest cricket competition in the world, as far as T20 goes, but Canada's GT20, one thing it does really well is it showcases a lot of associate cricket. They of course they got the Chris Lynns in there. They've got the Chris Gales, but they've also got
Even Steve Smith played
yeah, true,
when he
true, when
began.
he was
Yeah.
suspended. Yeah. Yeah. I know people that were like went to watch that just because of that.
Mm.
But yes, so they've got those players, but they also have some of these great associate players like JJ Smith and players like that. Like they had in the past had a lot of good Americans. They had Kyle Phillip, they had Hayden Walsh Jr. when he was an American, and obviously Ali Khan, and that's where these guys got their springboard into the CPL. So those leagues are important, and they might even be more important if this limit's imposed, but they allow for associates to be overseas too.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully, other T20 leagues like the Big Bash here in Australia and other
Yeah,
leagues in the world could take a leaf out of the IPL's book when it comes to associate players, because there is talent there.
yeah,
They can
yeah,
be useful for your team.
yeah. I
Um,
anticipate, and I'm sure we'll talk about Major League Cricket here, but I anticipate a couple of Major League cricketers making it into these bigger leagues, because a couple of domestic Americans making it into these bigger leagues because of how well they did in Major League
yeah,
Cricket. And yeah.
absolutely. Do you have any favourite games that you've watched, Nate, in your cricketing journey thus far that you've seen? Favourite players or anything?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I have kind of favorite players from each nation. It's kind of how I think about it. So my favorite English player. It's funny because my two favorite English players were always Moeen Ali and Liam Plunkett, and then I actually get to meet Liam Plunkett when he comes here because he moved here, and I've had
Yeah.
so many conversations with Liam Plunkett. He's a great guy. Um, and it's kind of funny. I'm like, that's really weird because I love to watch the way that he played cricket. I loved it. But Moeen Ali was probably my first favorite cricketer. I just liked the fact that, well, first of all, he stands out. He's got this beard. He's got this long beard. He's on England's team, and he's the only guy with this gigantic beard. And so I was like, that's my favorite guy right there. It's funny because I picked my favorite hockey player when I was a kid because he didn't wear a helmet and he had a big mustache. And I was like, yeah, my favorite guy right there. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, like Moeen Ali was immediately my favorite. I had seen him. I just saw him perform real well the first time I watched England. But yeah, I have the series with the Misbah ul Haq, the push-up series, the Pakistan one. That's one of my favorites cricket moments. The best game I ever saw, two of them, USA versus Canada here at Morrisville, here at Church Street Park, in 2018, and we had literally 2,000 fans to watch USA versus Canada. The very first game was a super over that Canada won. They hit a 6 on the final ball to get into the super over. And then I think that's how it went. Yeah. And then the second game, USA needed 22 to win in the final over, and Stephen Taylor chased it down with a ball to spare. And that both of those were just unbelievable. Like the atmosphere was incredible. Fans stormed the field, and everybody wanted a selfie with Stephen Taylor. And at the time, that was the first time that fans had really paid attention to USA cricket games, and so the players, it was very emotional for them because they are toiling in associate cricket. Nobody cares to come to watch them play, really, no more than like 30 people or so. And then here we do we our cricket community here is amazing, and we put on this incredible America's qualifier. Instantly got Morrisville and Church Street Park's name out there, and it's been terrific ever since, as far as the reputation. Obviously it's been rocky roads, and USA hasn't played any games here since 2018. And one of the reasons they won't play games here is because they don't want to pay to manage the crowds. Like this is the only place they're going to get fans, and they don't want to pay to deal with that. So that's a problem. Obviously, if your national governing body is going to be that, it's very cynical seeming, right? It's just effectively a cynical thing to do. But so that's an uphill battle. But Major League Cricket and minor league cricket have utilized this wonderful ground really, really well. So that's that at least they've filled that void. And I do commentary for the Morrisville minor league team, which I really love. I feel really honored to be able to do that. But yeah. So, yeah, I guess back to your question, I've like veered way off. I think I really love Wahab Riaz is my favorite Pakistani player, and Jadeja is my favorite Indian cricketer. South African is probably Rabada, and then let's see.
Anyone from Australia?
Australia? Oh yeah. I really like Stoinis a lot, and uh I like Cummins a lot. But my favorite is definitely Watson all time, for obvious reasons. But yeah, I like a lot of these guys. I like Steve Smith a lot too. I really like Steve Smith. I love anybody who does something kind of new and finds a new way to do things, and it makes sense. Like the way that Steve Smith bats, his approach to batting is so It's so good. It just makes so much sense why he bats the way that he does.
Yeah.
And it's revolutionary in a way. And then let's see who else. Oh, my favorite Canadian is Hamza Tarek. My favorite West Indian is Hayden Walsh Jr. He played for USA, so of course he's going to be my favorite West Indian, and he's a great guy. He's a really cool guy. And New Zealand, shoot, man. I don't know. I really like Guptill because I like his fielding. I like fielders, but no, I like Phillips.
Yeah, Glenn Phillips is.
I like Glenn Phillips. I like Glenn Phillips a lot. I actually got to I had a really brief chat with him in MLC, just briefly. He probably doesn't even remember it. It was just, but like he made 2 over the shoulder catches in the same game from the circle, running running outside of the circle over his shoulder like this. And he catches him like this, running this way.
Yeah.
And he slides when he catches it, and both times. And those are hard catches to make in any sport. And he made them at Church Street. Church Street is crowned at about 1 degree or so, or 1%. It's crowned at like 1%, which means that if you're that you can't see the feet of the if I'm at deep square and you're at deep point, we can't see each other's feet because of the crown of it. So he's running basically down a hill when he makes these catches, and it's a hard thing to do there. And he said after the game he had never made one of those in a game, but he practices them all the time. And those were his first 2, and they were in the same game. So he's probably my favorite New Zealand cricketer right now. Yeah.
Oh, that's good to hear. Yeah, those are often the hardest catches to do, especially when you're running away from the ball and looking over your shoulder, trying to judge where it's going to land in front of you. Those are often the hardest ones.
You just have to have the attitude. I always liked growing up playing baseball, and now, and obviously playing cricket later, but growing up with baseball and playing it in college, I always loved those types of plays because no one expects you to make it. So there's no pressure at all. It's all fun. It's 100% fun. It's let me see if I can do this, and I'm going to catch this ball, and you have to be determined. I'm going to do this right now, and if you make the catch, everyone goes nuts, and it's the greatest feeling. So that's why I like this guy a lot. And plus, he's fast. He is so fast on the ground.
Yeah, he's lightning quick, and he's a keeper as well.
I know. When he's a keeper, though, I'm like, crap, he's keeping. Because now I don't get to see him patrolling the boundary.
Yes, but he's lightning. He's pretty quick in the outfield.
He's so fast. He's fast.
He's very quick. How can people get involved with emerging cricket, Nate? Because it's a lot of people, as you mentioned before, can contribute. So
yes,
if people want to contribute to emerging cricket, how can they do that?
Well, you got to reach out to emerging cricket, have some ideas, because obviously, look, this is cricket, right? And we focus on associate cricket is what we focus on. And so if you want to write about India, we're not the place for you. If you want to write about, Pakistan or Australia, we're not the place for you. But so you have to have the right attitude. You have to have, we're a little bit idealistic. You know what I mean? It's just the way that it is. And so we believe cricket should be somewhere. We believe the game should grow. So if you don't have that attitude, you shouldn't write with us. You shouldn't contribute with us. So that's for starters. So you have to decide that it's a good fit for you. If it is, email Emerging Cricket. Email us. I don't remember what the email address is, but it's I can't remember. But you can email me, cricknate@gmail.com, and we'll talk it over. If we do have people who come in and out who sometimes contribute and sometimes don't, and or just contribute a little while and then move on to something else. So but we appreciate all of that stuff. And but yeah, that's the biggest thing. You got to make sure it's a fit first. That you kind of like go with the program a little bit,
Yeah. That's understandable. So yeah, we'll leave a link to that in the description of this episode for everyone to check it out. Emerging Cricket. Now that's the talking about yourself. Hi everyone. Hope you enjoyed hearing Nate and I discuss his cricket journey. Make sure you check out Emerging Cricket and big innings and support Nate in the good work he is doing in promoting cricket in the USA. Links to those are in the description of this episode.